Good morning.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be joining us today on this webinar that we have. I'd like to welcome you. I'm Denny Chapman Jr. I'm a managing partner, mostly in charge of business development at the Chapman Group. With me is Dennis Chapman Sr., who is a longtime strategic account management and sales executive, as well as senior level consultant to some of the largest, most recognizable Fortune 1000 type organizations around the world that have strategic accounts, global accounts, key accounts, etc. Couple of administrative things before we'll get into the details of the webinar itself. We will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint along with a link that'll take you to any kind of replays or things of that nature, so you can share or go back over however you'd like to utilize it. After the webinar is done, you'll probably get that before the end of the week from someone here at the Chapman Group. If there are any questions, if you have any concerns or you want any more detail or to follow up on anything you might hear on the webinar, please use the chat window that you'll find in the GoToWebinar bar on the right-hand side. Type it in there, and we will answer and address those as best we can on the time that we have here on the phone. I think that we have a great webinar in store for you. It's good timing. I know that a lot of people are planning for the coming year in terms of what they need to do with their strategic account management organization to best grow the relationships and the revenues they have inside of their top accounts. And what we have in here are some best practices that you're going to want to include inside of what we'll call an operating plan for your strategic account management organization. And Dennis is going to go over what that means in a little more detail here with you. We'll have about 30 minutes, 35 minutes of a presentation, and then we'll open up the floor to any questions that might have come in or any other details or follow-up that the audience feels that they'd like to hear. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over the controls and the reins to Dennis Chapman Sr., where he will now educate you and explain some of the best practices that you're going to want to include in your strategic account management operating plan. Dennis?
Denny, thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction, and I think you hit on it. I think that, unfortunately, I think in the East Coast of the U.S., we're nearing the end of a nice summer, and we celebrate Labor Day in the coming weekend, and we're moving into the last few months of 2014, which is, as you mentioned, is becoming sort of the rich planning time for all of us. And what we're going to cover today is, I think, near and dear all of our hearts. I really believe, from my experiences personally, as well as observing other organizations, that much like in sports, when they have either preseason or summer camps or whatever it might be, usually the season is dictated by that preparation. And what we're talking about today is it's quite possible that 2015 for many organizations is going to be determined the success of 2015 during these upcoming next several months. I would say that most organizations we encounter do a significant amount of planning in the late August, September timeline, and for all practical purposes, they're locking down in October of what 2015 is going to look like. So what our goal is today, especially around the strategic account portfolio, by the way, I think much of what I'll be sharing today could apply to general sales or business in general. It should be valuable as you start to look at your operating plan as it relates to optimizing the relationships with those strategic accounts, as well as potential win-wins for both the accounts and you as a supplier. So that's what we're really after today. I always like to say thank you and kudos to those who participate in these webinars, because these are, meant to be sort of think sessions where we all get to think, capture some ideas, and put them into action. I never want to pretend we've got all the answers, but we do have some great experiences. And again, so kudos for you taking time out of your busy schedule, and thank you for attending. I think as you look at the screen that's in front of you now, and we use the term strategic accounts, I would like to clarify that you may use different, nomenclature terminology elsewhere. You may call them large, you may call them key. I mean, it could be a variety of terminology. But I think in general, what we're talking about today are those accounts that really can greatly determine our success. And that's what's so important about having an operational plan today. So as we segue into that, we're going to talk about the insights and practices as it relates to that. So, the first question on the table is why a SAM operating plan? And much like what I've already said, we have operating plans for our business. We have operating plans for practices, for sports teams. We have operating plans. And what has emerged and evolved in the global business community is that strategic account management in itself has become a business unit in many organizations, and certainly because of a lot of mergers, acquisitions, consolidations, that the breadth of a strategic account is so large that quite often it has spawned its own organization within a supplier organization that needs to have an operating plan. So as I continue to travel the globe, and even nationally or regionally, what we're seeing is a focus is that we want to have a very specific operating plan around those accounts that have such a great influence on our business. Now, today, we're going to talk about these key areas, and I've listed really in the bold that we want to make sure we understand the right accounts, deploy the right people, the right activities, the right development programs, tools, technologies, dashboard metrics. They're extremely critical. I'll highlight that. The right funding, you might call it SAM, operating expense ratios, and the right messaging. And this is sort of our table of contents today, because what we really want to do is do a deeper dive around each of these. Now, one of the questions that we encounter quite often from our clients or even the marketplace is who should own the operating plan? Well, it varies a little bit by organization. Quite often the sales leader, the most senior sales leader, probably has a separate SAM operating plan. What we're seeing in some more mature organizations, that there's actually a director of the SAM program, and in that case, they might own the operating plan. Now, there is a difference. When I say own, I would say mostly accountable for making sure that it is one in play, but they may not do all the components of it as we get into it. So what I've given you here, and by the way, just to also let people know, there is available on the Chapman Group site a download around everything we're covering today, not just the webinar, but also what we could call even a white paper around some of the content we're talking about. So I'm not going to read every bullet point on the slide, but if you look at the key members who could contribute, and I think that's the operative word we're talking about today, is other members who could be contributing towards creating what we would all call a best-in-class operating plan. And certainly different kinds of leaders from sales, operations. Operations is a critical part, especially because it has a lot of measurements and metrics associated with it. Marketing, HR, IT, and certainly, depending what type of organization you are, maybe even R&D and engineering and client services, because they play such a critical role in either developing product solutions or supporting customers. So my key message here is when you start developing the operating plan, make sure that your council or your contributing team has the right breadth of roles and participants on it. Now, I'd like to come right out with 4 very important tips that you want to think about as you develop this strategic account management operational plan. The first, it should not be done in a silo by the owner. It should be a collaborative exercise amongst that sort of cross-functional team of contributors I just mentioned. And it really should be collaboration. And I think that this is not always easy in a lot of organizations. The culture is maybe not a culture of collaboration, but we would strongly recommend that really helps. The second component is when you start talking about any kind of operational plan, is that you start to nail down a common language or nomenclature so that we all understand what we're working on, okay? And for example, as simple as it might sound, let's get a global or national understanding of what we're calling a strategic account or a large account or a key account, those kind of definitions. Or if we're calling somebody a strategic account manager, an account representative, let's get our nomenclature clear so that when we're speaking, that we are all speaking about the same important topic. And this really becomes critical if you're a global organization, because it's quite often some of the roles and functions have different titles and as well as authority. The third tip is one that we unfortunately still see is not as always as effectively included as it should be, and that is a lot of organizations are very good and effective at getting the internal feedback of their cross-functional team, but what they don't really have is what we would say the voice of the customer and or the marketplace, the external feedback. And it's our contention today that a real good operational plan should be built. One of the core foundational points should be the voice of the marketplace and specific customers, because they're the ones that if you serve them well, if you're aligned to them well, if you're going where they believe they need to go, it has a higher probability of success. And finally, my fourth tip is there are some experts in the world. You may have them on your team. There may be associations. You know, I would argue our organization has some of those people, that there are these thought leaders or advisors or opinion leaders, whatever your preference is, that can bring in some experiences, some knowledge, some practices that can save you years. And I would say that use them wisely, consider that, and I'm not suggesting they have to dominate, but there's some richness out there. An example today of what you're doing participating in today's webinar offers up the opportunity to capture some of that available knowledge. So some of what we're going to do now is I'm literally going to go into the guide, and this is downloadable actually, that I referred to. I'm actually going to go into a guide and talk about some of these critical factors and inputs that should be in the operational plan. I think there's two important grounding points as I cover these that we want to make sure we consider. One, that we do suggest that a lot of organizations today that we observe are very what I call inward out in their approach in business planning. And I believe you need to also be outward in, and that's that external feedback. So as I go through this, make sure that you consider and ask yourself that question, are we both inward out as well as outward in? That's critical. And the second component that I really believe is unfortunately missed in many operating plans is the win for the customer. I mean, when you're so inward out focused, quite often it's all about us as a supplier succeeding, and we fail to really understand what the big win is for our customers. So I would say a critical element of this, and maybe right up front, is what are those, define what are those wins for your customers, your accounts, as well as you as a strategic supplier. So let's chew in and bite into each of these. My approach is going to be, I'm going to take the practice and basically talk about, verbalize a little bit about what's in each of the columns and give you some insights in what we've discovered are critical components here. We would argue that the operating plan certainly all starts around some very effective account segmentation. And here's what segmentation is not. Segmentation is not just a ranking of our largest revenue accounts to our smallest revenue accounts. Today's model should be a lot more sophisticated and have factors. And we think of two critical axes: financial factors, relationship factors, and certainly some subcategories to each of those that help us determine what are really our strategic accounts, top accounts, important accounts, etc. So account segmentation should be where it all starts, because my SAM program should be focused on those accounts who are most ready to be strategic accounts. I wrote an article years ago. It was published in CRM magazine, and it was called Clients, Customers, Buyers, Which Do You Have? And unfortunately, there's still a lot of supplier organizations today that are a little confused, and they're treating all their customers the same way. And one of the causes of that is that their segmentation modeling, or whatever tools they're using for segmentation, do not give them the breadth of intelligence, or they're not evaluating enough of the data points to do it any other way. So it all starts with segmentation, selecting the right accounts. The next part of our operating plan should be really about talent management. And this is, again, an area that we see can be vastly improved versus where it is in many organizations today. And a very literal example. A lot of organizations have promoted their best salespeople into roles of account managers or strategic account managers. Our discovery is that those attributes, those behaviors, those competencies of a strategic account manager are much different than those of a sales representative. So all of a sudden I've got a sales representative with the expectation of delivering on what we need to deliver from our strategic accounts, and it's just not a good fit. All the way from in sales, I maybe want to get revenue, a pure opportunity focus, but in account management, instead of pushing revenue, I want to pull revenue through because of effective relationship management. I'm not in any way indicating that strategic account managers don't still own the number, and we still have to get revenue, but there are different dynamics in the kind of people that we should employ to be those account managers, strategic account managers. So I want to define in my operating plan, what are those attributes, what are those behaviors, what are those competencies, so I have the right people in my team. And by the way, the use of assessment instruments is certainly one way to do that. The third critical component in my operating plan is, what are these people going to do? What are the high value activities that I can directly link to relationship retention, sustainability, as well as revenue capture? What are those high value activities? By the way, account management activities can be much different than sales activities. So if I wanted to look at the day in the life of a strategic account manager, it should be well defined in my operating plan, and it might even be built into their KPIs as part of their compensation or bonus reward system. Example, one company we met with a few years ago, the CEO made a statement to me, and he said, you realize that 85% of our customers that visit our corporate office buy more from us in the next 12 to 18 months. And I asked him, was that a core metric? Was that a high value activity metric that he had on his team? And he just looked at me a little sheepishly and said, it isn't today, but it will be tomorrow. So there's an example where that might not be a sales metric, but in my top accounts, that could be a core metric that I want my account managers, strategic account managers, to actually work in accordance to. And really, high value activities is really about what I call ROE, return on effort. What are the things that we're going to do that's going to get us our greatest return? And return is not just money, but our greatest return from our strategic accounts. The next critical area I want to define, and certainly you have the latitude to add other things that you feel appropriate, what order you feel appropriate, but I would definitely define, what are those development programs for my people, the tools they're going to use, and the technology that's going to support them. I was very fortunate to have a grandfather in my life who had a great impact. He was a carpenter. And I said to him many years ago, before he went to other places in his life, I said to him, I said, "You're a great carpenter. How did you become such a great carpenter?" And he said, "I'm a good carpenter," he said, "but I'm a good carpenter because I have the right tools for my job." And I took that message and I sort of translated that into the world of strategic account management. It's very difficult to be an effective strategic account manager if I don't have the right tools, if I'm not being developed personally, and I don't have the right technologies that I can work with. So whether it be the right use and content within a CRM, whether it be the right collaboration software or tools amongst my team, whether it be the use of video technology, whether it be the continuous learning process that we employ within the organization, I should, in my operating plan, account for all of that. By the way, as you'll see in a little while, some of those things cost money. So this is another way to say if we're going to really become best in class, we need to invest in these kind of things. Now, probably near and dear to my heart, probably what I would say is one of the most critical components of the operating plan is the whole measurements and inspection and coaching. And really, probably the number one issue that we see quite often is the lack of measurements and metrics in the strategic account management program. And it becomes increasingly important to define those in my operating plan. Most companies are very good at defining what they're going to measure from a lagging indicator standpoint: revenue, profitability, inventory turn, products sold, solutions sold, services. They're very good at that. But what they're not real good at is measuring or documenting and measuring the predictive analytics that are going to cause success to happen. And whether it be relationship management, whether it be high-value activities, whether it be the right coaching process, those things need to be defined. And they need to be embedded into my one-on-one relationships with my leadership team. They need to be embedded into my internal business review process, and they need to be actually in some ways embedded into my external business review process. My voice of the customer metric. Do I have a voice of the customer metric that I can work with as a team? And what is my goal? So the key point here is in my operating plan, I've got to define, and I'm giving you a list in the far right, of some measurements and metrics that are going to be part of my strategic account management program, and it's going to be my guide of how we operate, and it'll be my measuring stick. Are we really doing a good job? This is how we'll know we're doing a good job that leads to success. Unfortunately, revenue and profitability, sometimes when I discover what the reality of them are, it's too late to take corrective action. Dashboards and predictive analytics allow me to correct every month, and that's what I want to do, is adjust. I certainly want to have a financial analysis component in my operating plan. I've got to be very good at defining sort of the projected revenue as well as potential operating expenses. One of the questions we get quite often is, what are some of the percentage? What does that look like? And I did a little bit of study work here, and what we see is that in a mature SAM program, quite often operating expenses can be anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5% of revenue from the SAM program. In a newer up-and-coming program, it could be much higher. It could be 2.5% of revenue. Now, obviously, that number may vary based on what you're including in revenue and what you're including in operating expense. So, but my key message is that you should have some benchmark, some targets that says, here's what we're looking at from an operating expense ratio, and you should, as your program matures and is more successful, you should be able to see that your operating expense ratio to revenue drops over time. That is the real value of a SAM program. Usually, there's greater revenue return for the same resources versus a sales program. The next point that I want to cover is communicating the plan. Now, we might call this socializing the strategic account management program. This is critical. So what I would like to offer up is one thing that we quite often see a lack of in the operating plan is how am I going to get everybody in my organization across the globe synchronized, aligned, understanding, operating under the playbook that I'm designing, my operating playbook. And there needs to be a critical component in your SAM operating plan of how I'm going to socialize this, broadcast it on an ongoing basis. We had a client several years ago who actually put up a site dedicated to their strategic account management program, and it was a container where people could go in the organization and actually learn best practices, share best practices, or understand what's happening in the program, and even to specifics around accounts. So this was, and they would broadcast that site. We've had another client who has developed chat centers to enable people on an ongoing basis to more socialize what is strategic account management, why are we doing it, and what is it delivering to us as an organization. So certainly not last and least important, but I would say that a critical component of any SAM operating plan is the communication component. Now, that may be owned by marketing. It could be owned by the strategic account management program office, whatever it is. But socializing the right messaging, the messaging process, whatever tools I'm going to use is a critical component. I basically want everybody on the same page. Then I know success will happen. So what have we talked about here today? We talked about, there was an infamous baseball player in the U.S. called Yogi Berra, and he had these things called yogiisms. And most people, when he would say them, didn't really get it at first because it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. But one of his sayings was, if you don't know where you're going, you will end up someplace else. And I think the key message I want to leave you with today is if we don't know where we're going with our SAM program, there's a high probability that we may end up somewhere else. And that's probably not where I want to end up, in the best interest of ourselves as a supplier, as well as your customers, your clients, strategic accounts. So keep in mind the critical components we've talked about today. Segmentation, the right accounts, talent assessments, making sure I got the right people on the team, having an operating procedure, what I would call a playbook, optimize the team performance around development of tools, practices, methodologies, technologies. Let's make sure we got some dashboards, measurements, and we're coaching. We have coaching that supports it. Make sure we understand our financial plan of what we plan to do and can do or need to do. And then finally, that I actually socialize it and communicate it. Not just once every 6 months, but maybe every month. I've got somehow a process in place to socialize this. So before I turn it back over to Denny and we address a few of the questions we've gotten in, I'd like to maybe give you my last thoughts. And as you go through your journey in your businesses, probably one of the most critical journeys is how we keep, sustain, and grow these customers that we call strategic accounts. And I've just seen that the difference between having a plan to make that happen versus what I have sometimes called random acts of courage during the course of a year is so different. To the difference of what we've seen is people with an effective operating plan can see anywhere from 8 to 16% more effective revenue growth than just tactical sales approaches. So my key message, plan your work your plan, and have it very focused, having one focused around those accounts, those strategic or key accounts that are going to make such a difference in your business. So Denny, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we can maybe address some of the questions that we may have gotten here.
Okay. Thank you. The first question we have is that and I'll summarize it for everyone. You covered 7 practices, and that's a lot. So if you were to prioritize this for an organization, out of those, what would be the first 2 or 3 that you would put a heavy priority on that an organization should do?
Well, I would say that I think it all starts with segmentation, knowing who to focus my resources, my energy on. So I would definitely make sure I've got clarity around segmentation. I think the second thing is that I'd want to make sure that I had clarity around, who on my team, what's going to be the right people to have on my team to execute whatever we decide to do. And the third is I would say that it's critical to understand what we're going to do, and I'll call that our measurements and metrics. So when it's all said and done, I think I can be successful with at least those 3 as a minimum recipe there.
And the follow-up question is, what are some of those measurements and metrics that are critical? If you could go back over those, please.
Yeah, I think there are 3 or 4 in a SAM program. I think one is voice of the customer metric. I think it's very important, or voice of the strategic account. I think it's very critical to have feedback, direct feedback from your customer in how you're doing from a people, product solutions organization, and how well they're committed to doing business with you. We call it a loyalty index. We do that kind of work. I think a voice of the customer strategic account metric is critical so that the team always has a benchmark in how they're progressing. I think the second is some kind of relationship metric in how we're sort of moving our current situation of who we know in our customer to a higher state, whether you want to call it a relationship or partnership state. I think I should be able to look at the dimensions of high, wide, and deep and have a relationship penetration metric. And then I believe that as part of making sure I hit the revenue number, I probably should have some kind of good opportunity qualifier metric so that I know how to work. What are the right things my team can do around having to build a more robust pipeline, but have a more robust qualified pipeline. So I would say those are probably 3 of the core metrics I would start with.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that concerns the effort involved in creating a SAM operating plan. So what type of effort could a person expect to put into creating one of these strategic account management operating plans? What would you consider to be the best way to sell this inside of the organization? And is there any type of a return that I could expect, that the person could expect to get from a SAM operating plan?
Okay, so let's sort of work in reverse here, return. We know by statistics in SAMA trending reports that formalized SAM programs produce higher rates of revenue and profitability than not formalized programs. So by having an operating plan, number one, there are statistics available out there that say that formalized programs deliver X% more. And I have those numbers for people. So number one, a formalized program delivers more. Now let's talk about the front end of that question, which is how much effort they might have to put in this. Well, here's the good news, and I got to walk a fine line. There are today, I'll call them templates or operating plans that companies like us have developed over the years that give companies a jump start. They don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. So I think I'd say that number one, start with a template, something that works, and then it takes probably a 30, no more than 60-day window to get the input from your team and collaborate around it. That's not every day. That's just a good work plan. But I really believe that you can have a good SAM operating plan within a 60-day window. And the return is going to be substantial. Now, how do you justify that? Number one, your company, if they do any business planning already, has bought into the fact of how important business planning is. Well, I just want everybody to think about taking this message to the important people that have to make that decision. You've already bought into the importance of planning. How important do you think it is to plan for those companies, our customers, who are going to dictate if we exist in 12 to 18 months? So I think they're the three pieces that you've asked me.
Okay, thank you. And there's one more question that we'll address here, and then if anybody has any further questions that they want to ask concerning any of the best practices or operating plans, my email address, dennychapman@chapmanhq.com, is right there. Contact info is on the screen. Utilize that, please. We'll answer any and all questions you have. But the person would like to know specifically around talent and performance. What is it that you look for, the top skills or performance attributes you look for in strategic account managers to build a good team?
That's a great question, because it really does all start with the people in many cases. I would put it in a bucket that I'll call business acumen. And I take that bucket and I'll bring it to life a little bit. I think it's the ability to understand the business, understand business in general, but also be able to translate what you know and then relate it to a customer. I heard a very prophetic statement the other day that what customers in the world want today are solutions to problems they don't even know they have. So one of the first attributes I would want in my strategic account managers is strong business acumen, both from a financial and organizational standpoint, but also I would want them to be creative, and I'd want them to be very strong problem resolvers. And it could be whether they need to recruit resources, make things happen. And then I think the third top thing is extremely good at managing up and down within their own organization as well as the customer organization. So there's this strong personal confidence and awareness that they need to do that. So the business acumen, the relationship building and strong financial background, as well as that ability to manage and lead. And lead, many cases, lead without authority. So they're the critical things I look for.
Excellent. And that is all the questions that we have today. So that's going to end up concluding the webinar. I want to thank everyone who is still on the phone and listening in. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to hear some of the thought leadership that our clients and whatnot have been utilizing to help optimize their SAM organizations. There are other webinars and resources related to all the best practices you see there and other account management and sales initiatives. You can find that at chapmanhq.com. There's a lot of stuff there. If you want to take advantage, I say please do. Otherwise, I wish you a good luck on your Wednesday, a good end of August, and a good week. Take care.
Thank you.